Hey everybody, welcome back! Today I am headed to the American History Museum here in Washington, D.C. again to continue on with the exhibit on the American presidency. Today's video is a deep dive into a somber but fascinating aspect of American presidential history as it focuses on the men who died while serving in office. From illness to assassination, 8 U.S. presidents have died in office, each under very different circumstances, and each leaving behind a moment of national mourning and a shift in the trajectory of American leadership. I love learning about history, the good and the bad, and as most of this was very educational for me, I thought I would share it here with you. I hope you enjoy. Let's go. The American political system experiences its greatest challenge when the person elected to lead the country is threatened or dies. The death of a president, especially by assassination, traumatizes the nation and plunges it into a period of questioning, reflection, and ritualized mourning. And from the peaceful, constitutional transfer of power to the vice president, there emerges renewed confidence in our method of government. Beginning with an attack on Andrew Jackson in 1835, there have been several attempts to kill the American president. 4 presidents, Abraham Lincoln, James A. Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy, died from assassins' bullets. 4 others, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, Warren G. Harding, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, died from illness. William Henry Harrison was the first American president to die in office. Harrison was 68 years old when he arrived in Washington for his inauguration in 1841, the oldest individual at that time to become president. Some questioned whether he had the stamina for the job. In a demonstration of his vigor, on a wintry day in March, Harrison rode on horseback in his inaugural parade and delivered his 2-hour address without a coat or a hat. He caught a cold and died 1 month later of pneumonia. Immediately, the status of John Tyler came into question. Would he remain the vice president, acting as president, or actually become president? Tyler expressed no doubts, and while some tried to challenge him, he immediately assumed the title and responsibilities of the highest office, settling this issue of succession. Success as a general in the Mexican-American War propelled old rough-and-ready Zachary Taylor into the White House at the age of 64. With his administration embroiled in the bitter debate over slavery in the new Western territories, President Taylor took time out to participate in the July 4th events at the Washington Monument. He was taken to bed suffering from acute gastroenteritis, the result of drinking milk tainted under the hot Washington sun. He died 5 days later on July 9, 1850. The following day, Vice President Millard Fillmore took the presidential oath in the hall of the House of Representatives. On April 14, 1865, President and Mrs. Abraham Lincoln went to Ford's Theater with Clara Harris and her fiancé Henry Rathbone. At 10:15 p.m., actor and Southern sympathizer John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln and severely wounded Rathbone with a knife. Despite breaking a leg as he leaped onto the stage during his getaway, Booth escaped into Southern Maryland. The attack on Lincoln was part of a larger, unsuccessful plan to kill leading members of the government in hopes that the resulting chaos would bring a negotiated peace with the Confederacy. Lincoln, taken to a house across from the theater, died the next morning. On April 15th, Andrew Johnson was sworn in as president in his personal apartment at the Kirkland House. Booth and several other Southern sympathizers were the subjects of an intensive manhunt. For 12 days, Booth avoided capture. The government offered significant rewards for any information that would lead to the capture of the assassins. Booth was located by Union troops in a tobacco barn in Virginia on April 26th and died from wounds incurred during his capture. 8 others were tried in a military court, 4 were hanged, and 4 received prison sentences. Once captured, the Lincoln conspirators were closely and constantly guarded. Iron keys locked their prison cells. Emotions were so strong that, with the exception of Mary Surratt, who was the only woman, the defendants were bound with these wrist irons even during trial. The public had an insatiable appetite for visual representations like this newspaper illustration of the assassination of Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln had become the first American president to be assassinated when he was murdered just 5 days after Ulysses S. Grant accepted Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, ending the American Civil War. In death, Lincoln achieved the adoration and popular appeal that had eluded him in life. He became a martyr for national unity and equality and a hero to the millions who responded to his death with an unprecedented outpouring of grief. The manner in which America mourned Lincoln evolved into rituals that shaped the way the country reacted to future tragedies, including the assassination of John F. Kennedy 100 years later. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton said on April 16, 1865, "Now Lincoln belongs to the ages." Objects owned by or associated with Lincoln quickly became relics, reminding Americans of Lincoln's greatness and challenging them to keep his ideals alive. One of the Smithsonian Institution's most treasured icons is this top hat, worn by Lincoln to Ford's Theater on the night of his assassination. Lincoln was wearing a black ribbon on the hat to signify the son he had lost in 1862 named Willie, who had died of typhoid fever at age 11. The flag was flown on the funeral train as it traveled between Albany and Utica, New York. Mary Lincoln decided that the president should be buried in Springfield, Illinois, his former home. Before leaving Washington on April 21st, Lincoln's body lay in state in the White House. Then, after a 2-hour funeral processional that included soldiers, politicians, diplomats, and freed slaves, he was placed in the Capitol Rotunda. Lincoln's body retraced the train route taken by the president-elect in 1861. Parades were held with caissons, riderless horses, and an array of elected officials. Not until May 4th was Lincoln buried. His train did not just transport him to Illinois, it transported Lincoln to immortality. Lincoln was assassinated on Good Friday, a fact which enabled many people to find a spiritual and personal connection to his death. Some viewed Lincoln's murder as an atonement for the sins of the nation after years of war and bitterness. Countless Americans wore pins, lockets, badges, and rings as public expressions of mourning and memory. This ring, with its cameo head shaped to resemble Abraham Lincoln, was one way that individuals could publicly express their grief and admiration. This is a mourning medley with the inscription, "Born February 12, 1809, assassinated April 14, 1865. When James A. Garfield was attacked on July 2, 1881, the nation was shocked, enraged, and captivated. President for only 4 months, Garfield was shot by Charles Guiteau as he was about to board a train at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. Severely wounded, Garfield lingered on until September 19th. An unsuccessful lawyer, evangelist, and insurance salesman named Guiteau believed Garfield owed him a patronage position in the diplomatic corps, and that the president's political decisions threatened to destroy the Republican Party. Guiteau was convicted of murder and hanged on June 30, 1882. In 1883, Congress passed the Pendleton Act, which sought to reform civil service and limit the number of patronage seekers like Charles Guiteau. In the summer of 1901, the recently re-elected William McKinley began a 6-week tour across America. At the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York on September 6th, McKinley held a public reception. The president, shaking hands with the crowds, was approached by Leon Czolgosz, a self-professed anarchist. Czolgosz fired 2 bullets into McKinley's chest and stomach. 8 days later, on September 14th, McKinley died, and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt assumed the office of president. Czolgosz was captured immediately after the attack. Swiftly tried and convicted, the 28-year-old factory worker and farmhand was put to death on October 29, 1901. Following World War I, Warren G. Harding won election in 1920, promising a return to normalcy. Often overwhelmed by his responsibilities and plagued by a series of political scandals, Harding was exhausted and in poor health during his 3rd year of his administration. During a West Coast trip, he complained of stomach problems in San Francisco and was misdiagnosed as suffering from food poisoning. On August 2, 1923, Harding died from what is now believed to have been a heart attack. Vice President Calvin Coolidge was vacationing at his father's farm in Vermont when he received the news. His father, a notary public, administered the presidential oath. Franklin D. Roosevelt held the office of president longer than anyone, more than 12 years. Under his direction, the United States endured 2 of its most significant and overwhelming crises, the Great Depression and World War II. The nation had grown used to Roosevelt's leadership and was comforted by his presence thanks in part to his strategic use of radio and his fireside chats. So when Roosevelt died suddenly at Warm Springs, Georgia on April 12, 1945, Americans were devastated. Vice President Harry Truman was escorted to the White House, and as soon as his wife and cabinet members could be assembled, he took the oath of office. In a democracy that demands access to and accountability from its elected leaders, presidents are vulnerable. There have been 11 attempts to kill a president of the United States, and 4 have died at the hands of an assassin. Since 1901, the formal protectors of the chief executive have been the agents of the U.S. Secret Service. Their courage, creativity, and dedication are taxed to the utmost in safeguarding the president. But millions of Americans would never forget where they were or what they were doing when they heard that John F. Kennedy was shot and killed by Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas, Texas on November 22, 1963. Kennedy's death and the subsequent period of mourning transfixed the nation, in part because television brought the events clearly, immediately, and constantly into American homes. Kennedy's death ended the optimism that emanated from the youth, idealism, and energy of his administration. As the nation mourned, the Kennedy family turned to the rituals and practices of official remembrance first practiced after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Nothing challenges a democracy more than the death of its leader. 8 times an American president has died in office, and each time the country has come together in its grief, mourning not just a leader, but the embodiment of our national identity. On November 22, 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the youngest man elected president, became the youngest president to die in office.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
In the days that followed, shock and disbelief turned to deep sorrow. But even in this time of mourning, the peaceful transfer of power was paramount. As President Kennedy's body was waiting to fly back to Washington, Lyndon Baines Johnson was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States.
I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God.
On November 25th, the country and the world said goodbye to John F. Kennedy. The casket of the slain president was carried on the same caisson that held President Franklin Roosevelt's body 18 years earlier. There was a riderless horse, symbolizing the spirit of the fallen leader, and John F. Kennedy Jr., who turned 3 that day, delivered his own history-making salute. Nearly 100 years earlier, America had mourned the loss of the first president to be killed in office. Abraham Lincoln was fatally shot by a Confederate sympathizer on April 14, 1865. He died a day later. As his body lay in state in the East Room of the White House, an estimated 25,000 people filed past. Some of the mourners were pale and limping Union soldiers just back from the Civil War. 1 week after President Lincoln died, a 9-car funeral train began a 12-day, 1,700-mile journey back to Springfield, Illinois. In Baltimore, thousands paid their respects. 500,000 came out in Philadelphia. And over 1 million people in New York City came to mourn their fallen leader. In several cities, a riderless horse symbolized the loss of an extraordinary man, elements that would be seen in presidential funerals for years to come. Assassinations have taken the lives of 2 other American presidents. When James Garfield was fatally shot in 1881, the White House was draped in black, a symbol of a nation in mourning. Years later, an anarchist shot and killed the beloved William McKinley. But there have also been unsuccessful attempts on a president or presidential candidate's life. Andrew Jackson was shot at in 1835, but was saved when both guns his assailant used misfired. Theodore Roosevelt was wounded by a gunman in 1912 as he campaigned for a second elected term as president.
Through what has been called
In 1933, His cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, escaped an assassin's bullet just weeks before taking office. And his successor, Harry Truman, was unharmed when two Puerto Rican nationalists made an attempt on his life in 1950. Gerald Ford was the target of two different assassination attempts in the same month. And in 1981, Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded outside the Washington building. Death from illness has ended 4 administrations. William Henry Harrison died from pneumonia in 1841. Just 1 month into his administration, he was the first American president to die in office. Zachary Taylor succumbed to a fever in 1850. In 1923, Warren G. Harding suffered a fatal heart attack, some say as a result of a brewing scandal involving several of his close friends. And in 1945, a cerebral hemorrhage felled one of America's most revered leaders. President Franklin Roosevelt died unexpectedly on April 12th. A profound sense of loss swept across the nation. Americans paused and honored their adored president with a national moment of silence. Many wondered how the nation would carry on without the man who had led us out of a depression and through a world war. But the country did carry on, as it always has. The peaceful transference of governmental power is a hallmark of our democracy, leaving the nation secure with the knowledge that the presidency will always endure.
The United States Secret Service had been established in 1865 to safeguard the nation's currency, but it has become best known as the agency responsible for protecting the president. It took on this duty in 1901 after the assassination of William McKinley. The special agents and uniformed officers' ever-expanding roles now include protecting the president and his family, presidential candidates, and former presidents, as well as guarding executive offices and diplomatic missions. After John Kennedy's death in 1963, the agency increased the number of agents detailed to the president, employed new communications technology, and became more proactive in intelligence gathering. All right, everyone, that is it. That is the entire part of the American Presidency exhibit dedicated to former U.S. presidents who died in office. I enjoyed viewing so many artifacts and learning quite a lot of things that I did not already know. It gave me a deeper understanding of the weight and fragility of the American presidency. Each of these presidents entered their office under different circumstances and at vastly different times in our nation's history. But what unites them all is that none of them lived to see the full arc of their presidency. Their deaths, whether sudden or expected, shocked the nation, and each time America had to pause, reflect, and reckon with what it means to lose a leader. Thank you so much for watching. I do have a postcard for this video. It is the top hat of Abraham Lincoln that we saw in the middle of this display. I would really like to send this out as a token of my appreciation to the first person to leave a comment down below and tell me that you want it. I'll write you a little handwritten note and send it out in tomorrow's mail. Just leave me that comment and I will send you an email address where you can send me your mailing address. And I would just like to say to anyone who is still here, thank you so much for watching this video. I had a great time and I hope you did too.